There is a belief held by most people that wealth is fundamentally difficult to attain, that the path to it is long and complicated and requires either extraordinary talent or extraordinary luck or both, that the men and women who have built genuine financial security are either unusually gifted or unusually fortunate or have access to knowledge and opportunity that ordinary people simply do not have. This belief is wrong. Not entirely wrong. Extraordinary talent and extraordinary luck do produce extraordinary wealth, the kind that places a man among the richest people in a generation. I'm not describing that kind of wealth. I am describing something more modest and more universally available. The kind of financial security that removes money from the list of daily concerns. The kind of accumulation that allows a man to make decisions based on what he actually wants rather than on what his immediate financial circumstances permit. The kind of wealth that most people say they want and that most people never build. That kind of wealth is genuinely more accessible than most people believe. Not because there is a secret that the wealthy are hiding. Not because there is a shortcut that nobody has discovered. But because the actual requirements for building it are simpler, more consistent, and more available to ordinary men of ordinary means than the complicated strategies and elaborate schemes that most people pursue in its place. My name is Niccolò Machiavelli. I spent 14 years watching men of modest means become wealthy and men of considerable means become poor. I watched the same conditions produce entirely different outcomes in different men, not because the conditions favored one and not the other, but because the men themselves related to those conditions in entirely different ways. And I arrived, through those years of watching, at a set of conclusions about why wealth is easier to build than most people believe and why, despite its relative accessibility, most people never build it. Today I share those conclusions, not as financial advice, as an observation about human nature and the specific psychological errors that keep capable people poor when the path to genuine financial security was available to them all along. I want to begin with the most important observation I made about wealth and the men who built it. The path to genuine financial security is not complicated. It is merely uncomfortable. And most people, encountering the discomfort, conclude that they have taken the wrong path. They look for a more comfortable alternative. And in looking for the more comfortable alternative, they leave the path that would have taken them where they were trying to go. This is the central mechanism by which the accessible becomes the unattained. Not through genuine unavailability. Through the specific human preference for comfort over the sustained discomfort that real accumulation requires. I observed this pattern in Florence with a regularity that eventually made it entirely predictable. Men of genuine capability and genuine desire for financial security would begin the work of accumulation with real seriousness. They would spend less than they earned. They would direct the difference toward something that would grow. They would do the unglamorous daily work of building something across time. And then the discomfort would arrive. Not dramatic discomfort. The quiet, persistent discomfort of watching the people around them spend what they were saving, of maintaining a lifestyle below what their income would have permitted, of continuing to build when the building produced no visible result and the temptation to enjoy what had been accumulated was constant and reasonable and seemingly harmless. Most men surrendered to this discomfort, not dramatically, gradually, one small exception at a time, one reasonable justification after another. Until the accumulation that had been building was being consumed at the same rate it was being produced, and the net position at the end of the year was approximately the same as it had been at the beginning. The men who built genuine wealth were the men who did not surrender to this discomfort, not because they did not feel it, because they had developed the capacity to sit with it, to continue building when the building was uncomfortable, to maintain the direction when every social signal around them was pointing toward a more immediately satisfying alternative. This capacity is not a personality trait. It is a practice. It is built through the repeated experience of tolerating discomfort without acting on it, through the accumulated evidence that the discomfort is temporary and the accumulation is permanent, through the patient, unglamorous discipline of doing the simple things consistently when the temptation to do the complicated, exciting thing was always available. The first reason getting rich is easier than most people think is this. The actual strategy required is simpler than almost anyone believes. I watched men spend enormous energy and considerable resources pursuing elaborate strategies for wealth creation. Complex investments they did not understand. Business schemes that required perfect execution across multiple uncertain variables. Opportunities that promised rapid returns in exchange for rapid action before the opportunity disappeared. Almost all of these elaborate strategies produced worse results than the simple one that the men pursuing them had abandoned in favor of something more exciting. The simple strategy is this: spend less than you earn. Direct the difference toward things that grow. Do this consistently across a period of years sufficient for the compounding to produce its effect. Do not interrupt it. That is the strategy, in its entirety. Every elaboration beyond this is either a specific application of one of these principles or a deviation from them. The reason most people do not follow this strategy is not that they do not know it. Almost everyone knows it. The reason is that it is boring. It does not feel like doing something. It does not produce the sensation of acting decisively toward an exciting outcome. It does not give the man who follows it a story worth telling at dinner about the bold move he made. It gives him, across years, financial security. And financial security, while genuinely valuable, does not feel as exciting in the accumulating as it does in the imagining. The daily reality of following the simple strategy is indistinguishable, moment to moment, from the daily reality of not following it. The accumulation is invisible in any given week. The compounding produces nothing visible for years. And so most men abandon the simple strategy for a more exciting one. Not because the exciting one is more likely to work. Because the exciting one feels more like doing something. Because the sensation of decisive action is more immediately satisfying than the sensation of patient, invisible accumulation. I watched this error destroy more genuine potential wealth than any market collapse or external misfortune I ever witnessed. The men who abandoned patient accumulation for exciting alternatives did not lose to bad luck or unfavorable conditions. They lost to the gap between what effective accumulation actually feels like and what they expected it to feel like. Expect it to be boring. Expect it to feel like nothing is happening. Expect the sensation of patient accumulation to be indistinguishable, in any given moment, from the sensation of standing still. And continue anyway. That is the entire discipline. The second reason getting rich is easier than most people think concerns the actual threshold of income required to begin building genuine wealth. Most people believe that wealth accumulation begins at a level of income significantly higher than their current one. That they will begin saving seriously when they earn more. That the margin between their income and their expenses is currently too small to produce meaningful accumulation, and that accumulation will become genuinely possible when the income increases. This belief is almost always wrong, and the evidence for its wrongness is consistent and observable across every level of income one have ever studied. The margin between income and expenses is not primarily determined by the level of income. It is determined by the relationship between income and expenses. And that relationship is shaped by habits and decisions that tend to scale with income rather than remain fixed as income rises. The man who spends everything he earns at a modest income will, in almost every case I observed, spend everything he earns at a higher income. Not because he is irresponsible. Because the decisions that produce the spending are not primarily driven by absolute necessity. They are driven by the social and psychological pressures that determine what feels like a normal level of expenditure. And those pressures scale with income rather than remaining fixed. The man who earns modestly and lives well below his means, who has built the habit and the discipline of directing a genuine portion of his income toward accumulation, will continue that habit at higher income. And the compounding of that habit, applied across the full arc of rising income, produces substantially more wealth than the habit begun only when the income has reached the level where accumulation seems genuinely possible. Begin now, with what you have. Not with the income you expect to have in 5 years. With what you actually have today. The margin you can find today, however modest, is the foundation of the habit that will produce the real accumulation when the income eventually rises. The man who has not built the habit will not build the wealth when the income comes. The man who has built it will. The threshold of income required to begin is lower than you think. The threshold of discipline required to begin is exactly as high as it always was. Begin. The third reason concerns what I would call the myth of the big opportunity. Most men who are not building wealth are waiting for something. An opportunity significant enough to justify serious action. A moment when the conditions align in a way that makes the path forward clear and the outcome sufficiently certain that the risk feels acceptable. This moment almost never arrives. Not because opportunities do not exist, but because the psychology of waiting for the right opportunity is self-defeating in a specific way that I observed consistently across my career. The man who is waiting for the big opportunity is not building anything while he waits. He is not accumulating the resources, the capability, the reputation, or the positioning that would allow him to recognize and act on a genuine opportunity when it arrived. He is simply waiting. And in waiting, he is consuming the time and the energy and the modest surplus that patient accumulation would have converted into something real. I observed a different pattern in the men who built genuine wealth across my time in Florence. They were not waiting for the big opportunity. They were building steadily from where they were, with what they had, towards something that was modest in its immediate ambition but consistent in its direction. And from that steady building, opportunities arrived. Not the dramatic, life-changing opportunities they had been waiting for. Modest opportunities, available to a man who had built something and therefore had something to deploy when the opportunity presented itself. Opportunities invisible to the man who had nothing to deploy because he had been waiting instead of building. Fortuna, as I have written in other contexts, favors the prepared, not the lucky, not the bold in the reckless sense, the prepared. The man who has been building steadily and quietly and consistently and who, when fortune moves, has exactly what the moment requires already in place. Stop waiting for the opportunity that justifies action. Start building the position from which opportunities become visible. The building is the preparation. And the preparation is what fortune requires before she will cooperate. The fourth reason getting rich is easier than most people think concerns the role of other people in the process of accumulation. Most men approach wealth as a solitary project, something they are building independently, through their own effort, in competition with everyone around them for the same limited pool of resources and opportunity. This model is wrong in a way that is strategically costly. Wealth, in my observation, is almost never built entirely alone. It is built through relationships, through the specific quality of relationship that produces cooperation, referral, opportunity, and the kind of trust that allows for transactions that would not be available to strangers. The man who has invested in genuine relationships, who has been reliably useful to the people in his network, who has demonstrated over time that his word can be trusted and his capability can be counted on, has access to a category of opportunity that the man who has not built those relationships simply cannot access. Not because the world is unfair, because trust is a resource that produces real economic value. The man who is trusted is extended credit that the untrusted man is denied. He is offered opportunities that the untrusted man never hears about. He is included in arrangements that the untrusted man is excluded from. And trust is built through exactly the same patient, unglamorous consistency that builds everything else worth having. Through being reliably what you say you are. Through delivering what you promise. Through maintaining your standards and your word when maintaining them costs you something. I watched men of considerable natural ability fail to build wealth because they had not invested in the relationships that would have amplified that ability into something larger. And I watched men of more modest ability build genuine security because the relationships they had cultivated across years opened doors that their individual capability alone would never have opened. Invest in genuine relationships, not as a strategy for extracting value, as the genuine expression of a man who is reliably useful, reliably trustworthy, and reliably worth knowing. The economic value of those relationships accumulated across years is substantial, and it is available to any man willing to invest the time and the genuine effort that genuine relationship requires. The fifth reason getting rich is easier than most people think is perhaps the most counterintuitive of everything I will describe today. The biggest obstacle to wealth is not poverty. It is the appearance of wealth. I observed this across my career in Florence with a consistency that I found remarkable. The men who were most visibly prosperous were frequently the men who were building the least genuine security. The men building the most genuine security were frequently invisible in terms of their visible lifestyle. The appearance of wealth consumes the resources that genuine wealth requires. The man who spends to appear wealthy directs toward consumption the very surplus that accumulation depends on. He arrives at the end of each year with the same net position he had at the beginning, or a worse one, having exchanged the possibility of genuine security for the temporary satisfaction of appearing to already have it. I have written in another context about the strategic wisdom of building quietly and revealing only from a position of genuine security. The same principle applies here with particular force. The social pressure to appear prosperous, to live at the level that visible success seems to require, to maintain the external markers of the position you are trying to reach rather than the position you currently occupy, is one of the most reliable mechanisms by which capable people remain financially insecure despite incomes that should have produced genuine security years ago. Resist this pressure with the same discipline that you bring to every other aspect of accumulation. Not forever. Not as a permanent condition. As the specific discipline of the building years, when the surplus that appearances would consume is the surplus that compounding requires. Live below what you can afford. Build beyond what you display. And reveal from genuine security rather than performing it before it exists. The man who does this arrives at genuine wealth. The man who performs wealth before he has built it almost never does. I want to close with the observation that I consider most fundamental to everything I have described today. Getting rich is easier than most people think, not because wealth is freely available to anyone who wants it, but because the actual requirements for building genuine financial security are within the reach of more people than will ever act on them. The requirements are simple. Spend less than you earn. Direct the difference toward things that grow. Do this consistently across sufficient time. Build genuine relationships. Avoid the elaborate alternatives that promise faster results. Resist the social pressure to appear wealthy before you are. Continue when the continuing is uncomfortable, which it always is. These requirements are not beyond ordinary people of ordinary means. They are within reach of most people reading or listening to these words. What is not within reach of most people is the sustained discipline to do these simple things consistently when the temptation to do something else is always present and always more immediately satisfying. That discipline is the actual bottleneck, not the strategy, not the opportunity, not the income level. The discipline to continue doing simple, boring, unglamorous things consistently across a period of years sufficient for the compounding to produce its effect. I built my understanding of political and military affairs across 14 years of daily, unglamorous work in the Florentine Chancery. Not through dramatic insight or extraordinary talent. Through the patient accumulation of observation across thousands of ordinary days that each produced a modest increment of understanding. At the end of those 14 years, the accumulated understanding was extraordinary. Not because any single day had been extraordinary. Because the compounding of modest daily increments across sufficient time produces something that no single dramatic effort ever could. The same principle governs every domain of genuine accumulation, including financial accumulation. Do the simple thing. Do it every day. Do it when it is boring and when it produces no visible result and when the people around you are doing something more exciting that seems to be working faster. Do it for long enough that the compounding has time to operate. And then watch what the compounding does. It does what it always does, for every man who has given it sufficient time and sufficient consistency. It builds something that looked from the outside like it arrived all at once. But that was, from the inside, the patient product of years of simple, unglamorous, consistent work. That is how wealth is built. That is how everything worth having is built. And it is available to any man willing to pay the price it costs. Not in money. In discipline. In the willingness to do the boring thing consistently for long enough. Begin today. Not when the conditions are better. Not when the income is higher. Not when the opportunity arrives that justifies serious action. Today. With what you have. Towards something worth building. And do not stop.